Hello and welcome back to the channel. So in this video, as I said in the previous video, we will configure remote desktop on our Windows 11 client computer, and we will use that to administer our domain controllers, or it could be a file server or other servers, right? It doesn't just have to be a domain controller. So I will turn on my client computer and I will log into my client computer, and then we will start to set it up for that. So I'm just going to maximize it. My client computer, I'm just going to click on connect for now, and I will just wait for it to take a few seconds. And if nothing is happening, I can just tap this option, but I'm going to wait for now. Okay, so now we have the login string for this. So I'm going to put my username. Oh, okay. So even before that, let's log in with that user we created. So we created Paul Riches in the previous video. So we can just put Paul, and then we put in Paul password. So once we put in Paul password, this is Paul logging in for the very first time, because when we set up Paul password, we created a temporary password. So usually in companies, they will have a temporary password that is standardized. So they'll always use the same password as the temporary password. So that temporary password will be communicated to the new employee by HR, right? So IT will give it to HR, and then HR will give that information to the new employee. So once the new employee comes to their computer, what just happened? So I will switch back. So I will put in that username Pat and Paul, and then I will put in the temporary password. And then once I press enter, because we set Paul to change password at next login, so it said the user password must be changed before signing in, because that's what we set. So we click on OK. Then now it will ask Paul to put in a new password, which will become Paul's password. So now I will put in Paul's password, and then once I'm done, I will just press OK. And then Paul password has changed, and then now Paul will log in. So this is a practical example of how things will be in the real world. So a new user like Paul, once you give that user his username and tells him his username is Paul, and you give him the temporary password, when he enters the temporary password, he will be told to set up a new password. Then he will set up the new password, and then he will log into his computer. And because he's logging in for the very first time, so it's going to take a while, because it needs to create his user profile on that computer. And then once he logs in, subsequent login will take a shorter time, because it doesn't have to recreate the user profile every time the user logs in, unless the user is logging into a computer that the user has never logged in before. So every computer within the organization that Paul logs in for the very first time, it will take a longer time, because Paul profile needs to be created. But then subsequent login will not take any much of a time, because the profile already exists on the computer. It will simply just log Paul into the computer. So this is one of the benefits of having a domain setting, because the users do not live or reside within the same database of the local computer. No, the user resides within the Active Directory database. So any user can log onto any computer that the company owns, right? So now Paul has logged in. But then, so let's say Paul is logging to this computer, but we click here, and then we can click on Paul's name, yeah, and then you can come and say switch user. So if I click on the three dot, I don't want to sign Paul, or I want to switch user. The reason why I'm switching user, I can click on other user. So this Wilfred user is a local user. This user resides locally on that computer. That was a user we created when we were setting up the Windows 11. But Paul is a domain user. So I want to click on other user, and then I will put in my administrator user. The reason why I'm putting in this administrator user is the fact that what I want to do, Paul will not be able to do it. Only the administrator. So what we can do, we can demonstrate that, right? So the first thing we want to do now is, since we have logged into our client computer, mind you, we will be going back and forth between the client computer and the domain controller. So this is the domain controller, DC01, as you can see at the top. So what I want to do here is, I want to minimize everything on DC01. I just want to click within the search here on DC01. I will put MSTSC, which is just the shortcut to open remote desktop. So you can either put that, or you can even just type in remote, and then it will show you remote desktop connection. But MSTSC is short. You can either type it within the search, or you can press Windows logo and arrow and put MSTSC and press OK or enter, and then it will open the remote desktop connection. Right? So this will be how you would open the remote desktop connection, and then put in either the computer name or the IP address. But before we come to this, right, we need to make sure that remote desktop is enabled on our server, because you need to enable remote desktop first on the computer that you will be remotely connecting to. So since we will be remotely connecting to our server, we need to make sure our server is set up to allow remote connection to come in. So we'll come back to our server manager dashboard. We'll click on local server right here. And then you just want to take a look at this place, remote desktop. You see it is disabled by default. Only remote management is enabled by default on Windows Server and 2022. So we want to come to remote desktop and click on this disable, and we want to enable remote desktop. So I will just come here, allow remote desktop connections to this computer, and I will leave that second option active because this provides much more security than the regular remote desktop. It even tells you recommended. Okay, and when you click select users, it tells you you can add user that can remotely. Since for now, Paul that we created is a regular user, he's not an administrator, he cannot log in to this computer remotely. We'll try that to see what happens. But it tells you that if the user account, they say the user listed below can connect. So if I list Paul in this list, it means Paul can connect. Or if right now there's no user here, but anyone who's a member of the administrator group, they can connect even if they are not listed, right? And we know that Louise is a member of the administrator group. So it even tells you, say, Louis already has access. So we know that Louise has access. But we can verify that when we come to a group. So for now, I just wanted to show you that you can add a user here, or you could add the user to the remote desktop group. So we will just enable remote desktop for now, and we'll say apply and okay. Okay. And when we come to Active Directory users and computers, I just want to show you something. So if I come to, I'll just open this. If I come to this user Louise, right? If you look at member of, you see one of the groups that Louise is a member of is the administrators group, right? So when you remember, it says that anyone who's a part of the administrators group can do remote desktop. But then you don't have to add Paul to administrator group, because adding someone to administrator is like, if the person just only needs to do remote desktop connection, you can just add them to the remote desktop group so that they can do it, right? So you don't want to give someone more power than they actually need. You just want to give them just the right amount of power for them to perform the task that you want them to perform. Okay? So now that we have enabled remote desktop on DC01, all we needed to do on DC01 is done. So we'll minimize this and we'll come back to our client computer. So let's try this. Let's log in with Paul. So I will log in with Paul. And let's say Paul, he's an accountant, but let's say he has a little bit of knowledge of IT. So, or maybe he came across this article online that tells him he can do a remote desktop connection to servers, right? So he knows that our server name is DC01. So now he comes to his computer, he types MSTSC, he opens his remote desktop connection. Now you can either put, because we have DNS resolves domain name into IP address. So when you want to access a server, you can either access it by the IP address or by the domain name, right? So our server name or computer name or host name is DC01. So we'll put DC01 here. And when you click on show options, we can have additional features here. We will come to that, right? So when we go to the Louise account, I will show you more of this. But for now, I will just hide this. I just click on connect. Just watch what will happen. So now it will bring up the user password. So the user needs to authenticate before they can access that server. So you can see KLA_Paul. So now I will put in Paul password, which is the same password that he changed, the new password he changed to login. So you put in your password and then you click OK. Then we'll try to perform a remote desktop connection. So you can be seated at your desk in the office, or you can be sitting at home, but maybe you have VPN access to your company's network and you can perform a remote desktop. So when you look at the error message, it says the connection was denied because the user account is not authorized for remote login. So even though Paul is a user that exists within our Active Directory database, so the user was authenticated, right? He put in his username Paul and he put in his password. So the Active Directory database will query using the LDAP protocol for querying the database. And then Kerberos is responsible for authentication, right? So Kerberos authenticated the user. That's how the user was logged in to the computer. So just because the user logged into the computer and like the user is authorized and has been authenticated to log into this user, doesn't necessarily mean Paul can just access any server. So right here, Paul got a deny because he's not authorized. His account is not authorized to perform remote desktop connection to our server. So Paul will be denied. Okay. So now what I would do is to switch user. So I'll click on Paul's name, come to this 3 dots, and there says switch user and go to Louise. So now we'll put in Louise password. And then when I log into with Louise account, I can come in the search and put MSTSC, and I will click remote desktop connection, and I will put the server name DC01. Okay, for pause and log in, we were trying, we put in the host name, which is DC01. But because of DNS will resolve it into an IP address. So this time around, we will put in the IP address to see what happens. but it should be able to log in. And our IP address is 192.168.100.1. So before I click on connect, I will click on show. Okay, so what this allows us to do is to put in our computer name, and then we put in the username to log into this computer, and we can save this remote desktop connection on our desktop. The reason why you want to do this is you don't want to, because as an administrator of this domain controller, every day you will have to remotely connect to your domain controller to administer the domain controller. So you don't always want to be typing in either the IP address or the host name and always typing in the same thing over and over. So what you want to do is to put in everything and save it somewhere on your computer. So whenever you come, you double click on it, it will just launch the connection. So that's what this option allows us to do. So for the username, I will put in Louise. I'm just setting it up so that I can be able to, let me make sure this name is typed incorrectly. So I can say, allow me to save credentials. I will click this. Then when you come to local resources, at this place, local devices and resources. So you can allow your local resources to be available within your remote desktop connection. So if I click on more, right now printers are available in clipboard, but I can come to drives, expand drive. Let's suppose that sometimes when I perform a remote desktop to the server, maybe I have some files or maybe some software on my computer, my laptop, or that I'm using in the office. So I have some software that I would like to install on the server. So instead of me putting that software copy on the USB, go into the server room and connect the USB to the server, I can just make my drive available to the remote, within the remote connection, so that if there's something on my computer, I can easily copy it to the server. So I will make drive C available. Okay, I will click on OK. And then these other things, experience just tells you about the resolution, advanced, it just tells you other things about advanced. So with the advanced, you see server authentication. So when you are performing your remote desktop connection, it will create a ticket and will prompt you about the login. So you just want it to be set to warming so that it can let you know, right? So when we come back to display is like the resolution of how you want the remote desktop connection resolution to be. So I will just come back to general, and so everything is okay. So I will click on save as. So this will allow me to save this file. So let's say I put it on my desktop. So I will come here and click on desktop. I will put a name. So it's good to name it so that you know, okay, this is this server, this is the server, right? So since this is the remote desktop for DC01, I will just save it as DC01. So I know that this is the connection that goes to DC01. It's going to save this file as a RDP file, which is remote desktop file. So or RDP means remote desktop protocol, right? So I will save, and I would. So when you look on the desktop here, now we have DC01. So next time when I come to log in, I do not have to put in either the host name or the IP address. I just need to double click on DC01 and will launch the remote desktop connection to DC01. But for now, I will collapse this by clicking hide, so you can hide, and I will just click on connect, and it's going to bring this up. So if this will always prompt you, so I can say, don't ask me again for connections to this computer. So I can choose that option and then click on connect. So I don't have to always. Then here I will say, remember me. So it's going to save my password within that remote desktop file. So I'll put in the password and I will click on OK. And then we'll try to perform a remote desktop connection. So I have to give it a few seconds and allow it to establish a connection. And then this is the warning I was talking about, because we are connecting to DC01. So it's showing this certificate and telling you about this computer. Are you sure of this computer? Do you know this computer? Yes, I know this computer because it's our computer. When we look at the name, it's DC01.KLA.local. So we say, don't ask me again for this connection. So I'll just take that and say yes. And then it will establish a remote desktop connection. So like I said, you can either use the host name or you can use the IP address. Because of DNS, either one of them can be used to connect to a particular server. So I'm going to so now you can see when you look at the top here, you see the IP address 192.168.100.1. So we have successfully logged onto our server remotely. So this is something as an administrator you will do right from your desk. You will just perform a remote desktop connection. And because when we were on the server, we had opened this Active Directory user and computer. So things that were open and not closed, they will still remain open, and you can see it when you perform a remote connection, right? So I can minimize this. I can see the server. So I can do anything to this server. I can administer this server, and you can come to the command line of this server. And when you type host name, it tells you DC01. So we have performed a remote desktop. So even though we are at our computer, but we have remotely connected to our server, and we can carry on other administrative tasks that we want to carry. And then if we want to come back to our client computer, all we have to do is just to minimize the remote desktop window. So I can minimize the remote desktop window, and I'm back onto my client computer. So I can come to the command and type host name, and I'm on the client 01. And then this is the remote desktop. And then I can come back to the remote desktop, and then I'm back to the remote desktop connection. So one thing I want to show you here, so this is, again, this is the server. So if I just come to the File Explorer, notice what you will see when we come to File Explorer and we come to this PC. Do you see C on client 01? Is because when we were setting up our remote desktop connection, we said that we wanted drive C of my computer, which will be your computer that you are seated on. We said we wanted drive C to be available within our remote desktop connection. So this is drive C of my computer. So because this drive C up here is the drive C of the server 2022, and this drive C is the drive C of my client 01 computer. So if I double click on it, it will open, right? So the reason why, and then when you come here, you can go to Louise, and when we go to the desktop, we should see that remote desktop file that we save on the desktop. So when we come to desktop, this is the remote desktop file. The reason why I did this is because it's easier to copy things. So let's suppose, like, let's say, so I'm on my client computer, and let's say this DC01 is a software that I downloaded from the internet on my computer. So now on my DC01 that I remote desktop to, I can just come to this file. So I want to show you something. So let's say I come here. I want to open the task manager. So I did type task. Within there, I click task manager. And wait a minute. So right now I'm on the server, right? Because you can see in the lower right hand corner, and server 2022. So when I come to the task manager and I will open this, so I will click on more details, right? So when I open more details, come to users, right? So you see Louise, it tells you Louise is logging. If I'm not mistaken, I think there is a limit. I think there is a limit with the remote desktop connections. I think it supports concurrent. I think by default it's 2 concurrent login. The reason why I'm showing you this, you can have a situation where someone log in to the server remotely, but they didn't end their section properly, right? So if I come here to the top, if I do this, so I'm back to my client computer. If I just click on this X, even though it will close this remote desktop window, but I haven't properly logged out of my remote desktop connection. So that connection is still active. So if a second person, which is another person who can remote to that server, then we have 2 concurrent sections. So if a third person wants to remote into the server, that third person will not be able to, because there will be the error of too many connection, or the server has, it's like you have maxed out on the number of concurrent connection. So let's suppose Paul, because he's not an administrator, but he can do remote desktop to that server. So now Paul contact you as an administrator and say, oh, I'm trying to perform remote desktop connection to the server, but I'm getting this error that the server has reached maximum connection for remote desktop. So as the administrator, what you can do is to go to the server physically and log in. Maybe because it has maxed out, so maybe you yourself as the administrator, you cannot also do a remote desktop connection because it has maxed out. So you have to physically go to the server, log in, and go to the task manager and come to users, and you will see all of the users that are having an active session. And let's say Louise is someone who, used the remote desktop and didn't properly end the section. So if you want to end the session, you can right click on the user and you say disconnect. It will end that user section. And then now you just call Paul and just tell Paul, okay, try to remote desktop again. And then Paul will be able to remotely connect, because you have free up a section, right? So that's some trick. And just keep in mind, sometimes it do happen, and a lot of remote connection goes onto a server, and the server will max out, and then additional connection will be denied. But the person will receive the message on the screen that the server has exceeded the maximum length. The server has exceeded the maximum remote desktop connection. The message will come on, and the person will call you, the IT, and that's how you can resolve that. You just go and end someone's section. So let's say I was doing a remote desktop. So how do I properly end my remote desktop section? So again, I'm logging here with Louise. This is my remote desktop section. What I would do is to click on the start button, and I will come here and click on the power. So when I click on power, don't do shutdown. If I click on shutdown, it means I'm turning off the entire server. You don't want to do that, right? So you want to click on power, and you want to come to disconnect. See that option right there? So when you click on disconnect, I would click on disconnect. So I'll click on disconnect. It's going to disconnect that section. This is how you disconnect from a remote desktop and not have your section stay active, right? So but sometimes people forget to do that. They forget to disconnect. They will just close the window and think that because the window has closed, meaning that section has ended. No, the section is still active. All right. So now I am back here on this computer as Louise. So now I will just try this file because we haven't tried it yet. So when I double click on it, you see, it will just remotely log in. So mind you, because I have put in the username and password and all of the settings within this file, you want to make sure you don't have someone just have access to your computer, because they can just double click on that and they will be remotely connected to the server. Okay, so now I have remotely connected to this server, right? So now what I can do, I will just now we can go back to the remote desktop area, right? So we can go to the file manager. Sorry, not file manager, but our server manager dashboard. And we can go to click on remote desktop. And we can go to select users. And we can say add a user. And what we can do is we can go to, if we know the username Paul, we can then type in the username here, Paul. And then you say check name, it will add Paul. But let's suppose within your organization, there are 5 people that are called Paul. When you click check name, it will show all 5 and you have to select the person. But let's say we don't know the username. There are thousands of people within the organization, right? And we can then click on advanced, and then you then click on find now. It will just show all the user down here, and you can just scroll and you'll see the user Paul, and you click on that user. Let's say for some reason you just couldn't remember the user, your mind just went blank, right? So you can just do the advanced and say find now. It will show all the users. But again, if this is a big organization, it will show thousands of users, right? So it's good to know who you want to give right to, and you can then put them in and let's say find and search. It will just search for that user. But now let's say Paul. So we click on Paul and then we click on OK. Now Paul is added here. We click on OK. And then we say OK. And then we say OK. So when you come back to remote desktop and you come to select user, you see that Paul is in the list. So now that Paul is in this list, so if I minimize this remote desktop connection and I come back, I will switch the user and then I will log in with Paul. So if I put in Paul password, I press enter. Now if I come to remote desktop, see I will get in this error that Paul is not authorized. Now let's try to connect again. So I click connect. Now I'm prompted for Paul's password. I'll put Paul's password. I will click OK. And voila, it will take a minute and it will try to log in. So let's give it a few seconds. You see, now Paul is able to remotely connect to that computer, because we added Paul to that allow user to log in. So look at what it tells us here. To sign in remotely, you need the right to sign in through remote desktop services. By default, members of the administrators group have this right. If the group you are in doesn't have this right, or if the right has been removed from the administrators group, you need to be granted this right manually. So for Paul is not a member of the administrators group. However, we manually granted Paul the right to perform remote desktop.